Hello, it appears that the situation is getting quite dangerous. The entire eastern front of Ukraine is collapsing. The Russians have been bombarding the Ukrainian troops heavily, and this has resulted in very large casualties. The Russians have taken their objectives. Most of the cities now in this area are under the Russian control. The Ukrainians are reportedly fleeing, leaving their weapons, and retreating any means possible. Those that remain are surrendering. If not, they're facing death. Zelensky has offered dire warnings of the situation on his eastern front, and it appears that Kiev is entering into a desperate situation of its own, where numerous MPs, or deputies, and the government are fleeing. So it appears that there's a very high likelihood that things are going to fall into chaos, and you might even see things like a revolution developing over there. Now keep in mind that food has become scarce, there's rampant inflation, there's no fuel, so the people, are not very happy with what's going on over there. This is all the setup that you need for a revolution. It may not go Zelensky's way. In fact, he may consider getting out of town. Now, in other escalatory news, and notice the disconnect between what's really happening in Ukraine and in the fantasy land that the West has sort of developed in their head about what's going to happen in Ukraine. So Denmark is sending over Harpoon missiles. These are anti-ship missiles. They're from the United States military ordnance. There's also been Neptune missiles sent over from Netherlands or Belgium. These are also anti-ship missiles. And not to be outdone, President Biden, just after signing the $40 billion package, and before the ink is dry, he is sending over another package. And this will include long-range missiles, multiple launch rocket systems. Some of these long-range missiles are capable of striking deep within Russia, 500 kilometers. This was a red line that the Russians had warned. So we'll have to see what happens. All these missile systems coming into Ukraine. We'll see how the Russians retaliate. Keep in mind that with every escalatory action, there is usually an equal and opposite retaliatory action. So, moving on to other escalatory news. We go down to the Black Sea, where Boris Johnson and the EU are contemplating sending a fleet of NATO ships into the Black Sea, obviously to confront the Russian fleet, so they can, quote, open up a grain corridor to help Ukrainians export wheat to the impoverished countries of the world to combat famine. Okay? And just a side note on this is, since when does NATO and the United States ever concern themselves with famine around the world? Okay? Consider that they create famine around the world. In reference, we have North Korea. Years of brutal sanctions. People starving to death. Venezuela, where they didn't like the leader, so they're killing the people with starvation. Cuba, war in Vietnam. Afghanistan, sanctions and war in Iraq, sanctions and war in Syria, sanctions on Iran, Somalia, Libya. The list goes on and on. So again, I ask you, when does NATO and the United States ever care about famine? I'll let you answer that. And going over to China, where we have the Chinese pledging to enter a nuclear arms race with the United States. They claim that this is because of the nuclear strategy of the United States and their military exercises. This will not go well, considering when you look at what they did with their military in a few years. Consider China has about 10 times the steel output of the United States. So we'll see who wins that race. Don't hold your breath. And looking over at Pakistan, which has been thrown into a revolution courtesy of the United States for staging a coup, removing Imran Khan as the duly elected president, elected by the people. However, it was an overthrow, and he was removed because he was pro-Putin. He had gone to Russia. It's only shortly right after the invasion, and he had pledged his economic cooperation with Russia. And this obviously did not go well with the American State Department and intelligence agencies. Imran Khan had supposedly evidence proving that there was a United States coup. So another event, courtesy of the United States, to plunge another country into chaos. Way to go, Biden. And going back over to Europe, where the situation with the sanctions seems to be not going so well, as several countries seem to be getting cold feet, watching their people get quite angered by the staggering inflations and shortages. Notably, Serbia, Hungary, and Germany has gotten cold feet. Therefore, Zelensky lashing out at these countries, especially Germany, which is probably not even helping things for himself. But Germany went from being quite supportive, and in only about 7 weeks or so has gone to providing 0 weapons. And it appears on the sanctions they're also starting to back off. Therefore, the sanctions seem to be starting to crack. I think over time you're going to see more and more of these European countries realize that this whole Biden sanction plan was more harmful to themselves than to Russia. And, the facts are facts. If you look at Russia, their supermarkets are full. Their prices actually halved, whereas you go to the United States and Europe, the prices have doubled for the food, and there's mass shortages of fuel and food. So I think a lot of these European countries are going to start to see, how brutal the cost of living has changed in just 1 year since Biden did them this big favor. World leaders and NATO commanders are also starting to speak out against the war in Ukraine. Notably, we have ex-president of Japan, ex-president Abe, who basically came out harshly against Zelensky and had warned that this war wouldn't have started if you had just simply agreed that you would not join NATO. And the silly thing about all this is, and this is where that the United States basically wanted this war. This is like the proof that if you look at how they tricked Zelensky into believing that he would become part of NATO, I mean, this went on for a while. And there are some videos out there, one particular where there's several State Department officials and embassy consulate officials, and they're basically laughing at how they duped Zelensky. And all you need to do is watch that, and then you kind of put it all together. You realize they put in an incompetent buffoon as a puppet of Ukraine. He's an actor. He's corrupt as hell. They knew he would take money for anything, and he's a drug addict. I encourage you to watch the video on that. You can just Google it. And that's what they needed in Ukraine. Now keep in mind, you have Biden there for, years with all his corrupt schemes. The biolabs they all comes out of with the Hunter Biden. And there's documents that support the creation of the biolabs and all the, the Burmese stuff. There's a lot of links all over corruption with these characters. So the thing with Zelensky is they played him along. And this is how they got Putin to invade Ukraine. Because, of course now, it's all you hear, we were not going to ever admit Ukraine into NATO. I mean, it's over and over. Now everyone knows that. But nobody said that before. But if you think about it, I mean, I knew that was not going to happen. I think most people who study the NATO and how you get into NATO, and I mean, look at like Turkey, it wasn't easy for them to get in. It takes a long time to get into NATO, and you've got to have you got to have things in order. So, they were floating all this stuff, we're going to fast track you into NATO and all this kind of BS, and that was never going to happen. But they needed the fool to believe that was really a possibility. And they even let this buffoon believe that they were going to move in nuclear weapons and other kind of stuff, troops, into Ukraine. So this was all used to get the war going. Okay? So you can see how escalatory the West is. From the get-go. It was all about getting the war going, and they continue to push the buttons to get this thing going. They want a hard, hot war, even if it means nuclear war. And I know that sounds crazy, but look at their actions. I said this over and over again in my other videos. Follow the actions, never listen to the words. It's always about their behaviors and what they're doing. And everything points to escalation, escalation after escalation. And where does it end? Does the bully walk away? I say no. So I think the people in the United States, in Europe, and Russia are in great danger. And people now they're just so numb to the idea that there could possibly be a nuclear war. People just don't think that's possible. But consider that even in the 70s and 80s and all this period going back, there was approximately 50 near fires of a bomb or a nuclear, like a missile or sub. There was approximately 50 near fires. Now, we know about a few. A few have been unclassified, like the Greensboro event, the Arkansas, when the Titan II exploded. You can watch Command and Control. It's a great movie about that. But briefly on that, there was a nuclear warhead on top of the Titan II. The missile blew up and propelled the nuclear device through this thick 3-foot steel reinforced concrete pad, blew it off into the air, and it landed in a field. There was a 50-50 chance that that was going to explode, according to experts. They didn't find it for a few days. So here's a live nuclear warhead that was blasted through 3 feet steel reinforced concrete and didn't explode. Flew up in the air and landed in a field. Now, they didn't tell anybody. They didn't evacuate anybody. And they knew for hours and hours that missile was sitting in a silo ready to blow. It was leaking the oxidizer into the fuel. It was a matter of time before they mixed, where it would explode. They knew it was going to explode. They did not activate any evacuations, even in the near area. So what I'm trying to tell you here is they're not going to tell you if something's going to happen. They're not going to tell you anything. You think that there's going to be these national broadcasting thing that goes off and warns you that there's going to attack? I seriously doubt that. So this is where you really have to follow events very carefully. You have to learn as much as you can on your own and learn about the risk. You have to prepare accordingly. Keep in mind, we have never been this close to an actual nuclear war than we have now. Now, I know a lot of people, they point back to, the Cuban Missile Crisis. No. That was nothing. And actually, that was really like a nothing burger, but people just don't understand it. Kennedy was a little tricky. He and his brother had concocted a scheme where they were working with the Russians under the table, and they didn't tell anybody. The situation was already being diffused. They were going to remove the missiles in Cuba, and the Americans were agreeing to remove the missiles in Turkey. And that's what happened. Meanwhile, they played all the generals, Johnson. They didn't tell them that's what they were doing. These guys are all, pissing in their pants. They were all, they actually have recordings and stuff. They actually recorded their, it's like a secret recordings of these military leaders. A lot of them were talking about nuking, Russia and everything. And Kennedy was like basically trying to hold back, a smirk. And he actually used those tapes as sort of like leverage, like kind of like a blackmail thing. And this is one place where Johnson was so embarrassed by what happened. So when you have the phrase, that SOB will never embarrass me again, that's the reference. It goes back to that day where all the military commanders were packed in that boardroom, and they're all trying to figure out, they're all panicking, trying to figure out what to do. And half of them were like, let's nuke Russia, and and Johnson basically was like crying, and he was like, he couldn't handle the stress. And everyone saw that he was incapable of dealing with that situation. And so just so you know, it's just something interesting. If you didn't know where that phrase, that SOB will never embarrass me again. That's what that's the reference it goes to. So anyway, I hope you thought this was interesting, and I'll give you an update as soon as I can, probably tomorrow.